Hello, welcome along to another episode of Serie Chronicles with me, Patrick Kendrick, today alongside Nicky Bandini. And it's been another wonderful weekend of Italian top flight action. Before we get into the entire show, Nicky, how was your weekend, football aside?
Oh, football aside, what sort of questions? No, I had a good weekend actually. I was up in London, saw some friends, and nothing too out of the ordinary. I'm trying to think if there's anything particularly sort of noteworthy about it for listeners, but no, I just sort of. It's always tricky when you do the job we do, and I certainly have the same experience, Patrick. When you get to this time of the year where there's Champions League games and Europa League games, it's brilliant fun and a great privilege and the most exciting time in the year to do this job. But sometimes it's also a real struggle to manage to remember to be a person who has other parts of their life that aren't just work, and to see people and to make sure you're keeping up with everyone, and that is was nice to get a bit of that in this weekend for sure.
I know the feeling. Yeah, that's been my sort of all season long. That has been my resolution, basically, is trying to do more socialising and a little bit less work, because occasionally you can just think, okay, this weekend I'm commentating on these matches, so I spend my free time prepping, and then the rest of the time I'm doing the game itself. Whereas you do realise that there are opportunities and windows around it to actually have a normal life.
My mum's 70th birthday is coming up, and it's going to coincide with the second leg of Atletico against Inter, and I was offered some work around that, and I've said no to it, and because my mum's 70, and it's a tough one, because of course I'm going to want to watch that game anyway. But you've got to make some decisions for your family as well, don't you? So
here, absolutely, yeah. It's only in recent years I've actually started attending friends' weddings, which has been nice as well, unless it happens to fall during the off-season, which is normally good with the summer weddings. Anyway, let's do a bit of housekeeping. A reminder of our free 7-day trial of our Chronicles Tifosi Patreon membership, so you can get access to all full episodes 100% ad-free, plus bonuses such as videos and behind-the-scenes content. Also, please subscribe to our Serie Chronicles YouTube channel. We had a nice boost in subscriptions last week. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. Personally, there's also a little bit of an internal battle there, whether my channel, Patrick Kendrick, do subscribe to that as well, whether I can get to 4 figures before the Serie Chronicles one. So a slight conflict of interest. I am using the Serie Chronicles platform to plug my own YouTube channel.
Trying to get ahead of us. Oh my goodness.
Let's say my upload schedule is a lot less frequent than Serie Chronicles. Yeah. So if you actually want content that is not at least a year old, then I suggest you go to Serie Chronicles. And finally, do please give us a 5-star rating, provided that is your genuine opinion of the podcast, and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
None of this. Patrick, what's this equivocating? None of this genuine opinions. Give us a 5-star rating. I feel like I should say as well, guys, Mina hasn't been kicked off the show or anything. She just can't be with us this week. So don't worry if you're wondering where's Mina. She's got some stuff, talking about real life stuff. She's got some real life stuff to deal with, but she'll be back before too long. Don't you worry.
Absolutely. So, round 26, lots to get through. And I'm almost tempted to start with the standout performance of the weekend, going sort of reverse chronologically. I want to talk about Roma Torino. I want to talk about Paulo Dybala, who struck a hat-trick last night at the Olimpico for Daniele De Rossi's side. Also, I'm sort of being a little bit obsequious here because producer Simon is wearing a Roma shirt. You can't hear him. We can see him. He's right in the middle. He's now proudly brandishing his Roma shirt. Dybala, we know he can do this, but just occasionally he reminds us what a good player he is.
Yeah, producer Simon kissing the badge, by the way, which usually in my experience means he's about to accept a 50 million euro transfer somewhere else. I don't know. It was brilliant, wasn't it? I mean, Paulo Dybala is, and this is a recurring conversation for us on this podcast, thing we talked about all the time. Dybala's one and only drawback as a footballer. Well, actually, I shouldn't say this. We talk about this on the podcast all the time. Mina might disagree. I would say Dybala's only drawback as a footballer is that he's not on the pitch half the time. When he's on the pitch, he's flipping brilliant. I say that Mina, who I'm sure will listen, and I have gone back many, many times down the years about back and forth about whether he delivers in the big games like he should. But he's wonderful. And I think my favourite part of this one, honestly, Patrick, it was obviously some beautiful technical football from Dybala, who has these moments of just outrageous technical ability and close control that are jaw dropping every season, every game. I think you see something from him. But the favourite moment for me is him scoring and then running and jumping on Daniele De Rossi, almost like that scene, almost like someone who's just seen their long lost loved one at a train station and is running up and can't hold back and jumps on them, and really spoke to the mood at Roma right now of having fun. And there's a bigger conversation that we were having, of course, with producer Simon just before we came on about, is it time to start talking seriously about, is this job now De Rossi's properly? Is he more than just the caretaker, the traghettatore, the ferryman to the end of the season? And
yes.
I'm with you. I think it is. But before we even get to that, I think it's worth saying just the vibe change from late Mourinho. Every week, new polemic, new thing to argue about, new thing to complain about, always another lament about referees or schedules or whatever else it was, to just what feels like Roma's moment of just joyful football. And that doesn't mean flawless football, but enjoying themselves a lot, I think is something to behold.
Careful, they'll be coming for you in your mentions now that you're another Mourinho hater.
The
just
Mourinho
like me.
crowd do come for you. I don't know if this is one of those things that's just very like,
it's quite tribal,
boring to
isn't it?
listeners, journalistic conversation, but there are certain figures who, when you talk about them, you get strong reactions online as a journalist, and Mourinho
His
is always one of them.
as well. CR7 is another one who tends to have a pretty strong lobby as well. But anyway, no, I completely agree. You know what it reminded me of when Dybala ran across and basically jumped on De Rossi? It was similar to Di Lorenzo making a beeline for Spalletti when he scored against Inter at the back end of last season. But we hope there's a different denouement this time. That's because that was basically the tacit confirmation that Spalletti was leaving after the rumours began to emerge. This time around, we feel that De Rossi has a lot of credit in the bank because of the results. That's 5 league wins from 6 now. The only match they lost was against Inter, and that was a game they led 2-1 in. We have seen, and he conceded as much in his pre-match press conference, they haven't necessarily been able to sustain really high performance levels throughout the 90 minutes. But he qualified that by saying, well, when we're good enough to get results. And I don't even think we can necessarily bring in that caveat that we were doing before about, okay, well, they've only played Verona and Salernitana and Cagliari. Torino, a good side, they stop you from playing. To score 3 against Torino is no mean feat.
Yeah, I think my sort of feeling on this early De Rossi Roma is that they absolutely can be got at. I think they don't look very stable. They look vulnerable when teams come at them. I think that happened in the game against Feyenoord. I thought they were better than Feyenoord across 2 legs, but both of the goals reflected something in the vulnerability that they had. And I think, gosh, that's going to make for a fascinating next Europa League round, given what we know about Brighton and the fact that they also have these 2 faces to them, that ability to throw everything at you, and also the more vulnerable side. I mean, that story is going to be brilliant top to bottom. De Rossi talking about his daughter and De Zerbi's daughter becoming friends through the Roma club in England is its own story, and I'm really looking forward to talking about that more. But just on the football right now, I do think there's going to be this valid conversation about, is De Rossi just succeeding on vibes right now, or is he doing things that are tactically clever? Is he actually smart enough to hold down a job like this? And I think it's still slightly too early for some of those conversations. I also think in football, there's always more than one way to skin a cat, right? And I think that there's, without question, jobs that fit certain managers better than others. And again, I worry saying this that I'm going to get messages from Mina later about how wrong I am. But I think about Zidane at Real Madrid. Zidane was perfect at Real Madrid. Would Zidane have been perfect? Would Zidane have been perfect even at Roma? I don't know, but certainly would Zidane have been perfect at some other random mid-table club or a lesser club, and I know
Do you
people are
think
going to
deep
talk
down
about
he knows that, and that's why we've not seen him anywhere else other than Real Madrid?
maybe, or maybe it's just not where he wants to, and it's not a life experience that he wants. And I think that's a valid thing for anyone to say when they've made as much money and had the career that Zidane had.
True.
Maybe you just don't want to do it. But that's one of the fun things with De Rossi, right? Listening to him talk about everything afterwards, and talking specifically about that hug with Dybala, and him saying, I enjoy celebrating with Dybala just as much as I enjoyed celebrating with Nicola Rauti. He doesn't care whether it's here or whether it's Spal or whether it's somewhere else. He's loving specifically relating to players and having that sense of working together for something, which is clearly who he was as a player. It's who he was as a player, was to be very much at the center of the dressing room, to be someone who was always selfless and working for his teammates. And I think he views his role as a manager like that. He views his role as a connector, and as someone who part of his role is to make the team pull together. And I think that it's valid as a manager and can be successful, to round back to the point I was making, to be that kind of manager and not be the world's number one tactician. I don't think every single manager who's successful is Pep Guardiola.
Agreed.
And I think that that's where your staff comes into it, right? That's where you have your match analysts, you have your video staff, you have all sorts of people who can help you with specific parts of it. And I've even had that conversation with Stefano Pioli, where we talked about being a manager, and he said that to him the most important part of it was the man management, the working with individuals and helping them get their heads in the right places to improve, and someone else can help me with the analysis. So that there are definitely different ways to be a successful manager. So I think I'm not trying to put De Rossi in some elevated position that he's not yet shown he's worthy of, but I also think the idea of dismissing him because he might not have all the same characteristics as a Guardiola, or even closer to home, a Gasperini, who I think of as a really smart tactical manager, that doesn't mean he can't be a big success.
I completely agree, and I think you can only work with the players you have at your disposal. I mean, lest we forget Roberto De Zerbi, who we've mentioned there, had a pretty poor spell in Serie A with Benevento. I mean, it was embarrassing in terms of results. But, to judge De Rossi on the fact that he was sacked as Spal boss, I think is being a little bit reductive and not fair, and what I like about what I've seen from him so far is there are so many different facets to being a head coach in the modern era, and communication is a big part of that. He clearly communicates well with his players because they've really bought into what he's doing. You can see that the sort of visceral reaction they're having to him on an emotive level, but also in his press conferences, Simon and I were discussing it before we went on the air, that he's such a good communicator. He's very frank. He doesn't dodge questions. If he feels that a journalist is trying to trip him up, he'll call them out, and albeit with a slight wry smile. He's just very good, and he's open and honest about where he feels he needs to learn, where his team can improve, how he has studied as well, going to watch Juric's training sessions at Verona, seeking advice from De Zerbi, and I'm very impressed with him. And I don't think you can ever say, we're going to try and have the foresight to think this might end up, the obvious comparison is Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who was a club legend, who was synonymous with United winning the Champions League, came in, I think it was 17 wins and a draw from his first 19 matches, kept the job on a permanent basis. Unfortunately, this is a results business. You can't say, okay, De Rossi's got results, but long-term we have doubts about his tactical now, so we're going to keep him in for 6 months. If he gets results that take Roma into a top 5 finish and they qualify for the Champions League, he has the right to take them into next season and try and progress the club forward. And if he can't do it, then that decision will come and it will be a painful decision. But I think it would be very unfair to dismiss him and say, okay, he just benefited from the fact the club was at a low ebb following the dismissal of Mourinho and the players were just, that was that new coach bounce. I think you have to judge him on his results and his overall contribution, which so far has been almost wholly positive.
And I think there's to talk about the team specifically, I think there's an interesting dynamic to the shift in Roma, which is under Jose Mourinho, it felt like there was this acknowledgement that you've got Lukaku and Dybala, and those two players are going to very often be able to win you games just by being brilliant. And so Mourinho's approach to that, sort of conceptually, was to say, okay, so we keep things tight and we give those players an opportunity to win the game for us. And I feel like the concept has been flipped on its head under De Rossi, which is, when I look at this team, is it a balanced 11? Not completely, but we have all this potential up front. So let's put the emphasis on what we can do going forward. And if the back's a little bit ropey, well, that's okay, because we're going to score a lot of goals. And it's certainly more entertaining to watch. Can we say it's better? We're still a little early, but the results have been good. And I do think it's getting this buy-in and enthusiasm. And you remember the attacking potential in this group, because it isn't even just Dybala and Lukaku. It's Pellegrini, who's been scoring goals for fun. And it's Tammy Abraham coming back soon as well. And it's even others like Cristante looking like the shackles have come off a bit and doing different things. It's a shift in emphasis that I think is really... it's tapping into something different in the same group of players.
Absolutely. I feel like we could talk about Roma and De Rossi for a full hour here, so we should move on. I would just say, I would add Leandro Paredes as well to that, as another player who's looked completely transformed under De Rossi, having played with him as well during his first spell at the club. And nice to see Tony Snabry, who was very briefly at Roma, having a nice chat with De Rossi after the full-time whistle. So clearly he's a people person who builds relationships. The big game of the weekend.
Nice to see Chris Smalling back as well, by the way.
Absolutely. First start since the 1st of September. And there's also the tantalising prospect of Lukaku and Abraham playing together, which De Rossi said he has been considering as well. So one to watch there. But the big game on paper was between Milan and Atalanta. And after being so heavily criticised about his goal output, having not scored in Serie A since September, Rafa Leao decided to take 3 minutes to score one of the goals of the season against Atalanta. And I wasn't able to watch the game, Nikki, because I was doing Lecce against Inter, which was the kickoff directly before that, and we'll get on to the Nerazzurri in due course. But watching the highlights back, it felt like this result wasn't necessarily fair on Milan. It was a slightly risultato bugiardo. It didn't really tell the whole story. It looked like the rossoneri did a lot more to win the game than Atalanta did.
I would agree with that. There was obviously controversy around the penalty from which Atalanta got their goal.
Is that a clear and obvious error?
I don't think it's clear and obvious error at all. I don't know for certain. I think it's even the right decision once it's been changed. It's one of those with high boots. This line that's a bit blurred about when it becomes high enough for it to be the defender's fault, and when it's the attacker lowering their head down. And I don't know. I think it was
you know
on
what
the
they should
borderline.
do to resolve that? They should get the equivalent of like a limbo pole and superimpose it on the pitch. And as and when a boot is above that line, then that is a high boot. And when it's because it's misleading as well, isn't it? You've got Milan Djuric, who's like 6'7", and then you've got other players in the league who are much smaller. Insigne's 5'3". Obviously, he's not in the league anymore. Lamek Banda, let's say 5'3". There's a big difference there, perspective-wise. A high boot on Lamek Banda, who's 5'3", is probably only up to the waist of someone like Milan Djuric. So it's quite subjective, isn't it?
Definitely subjective. And it's one of those rules that's not specific to Italy. It's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine, the high boot rule, because it does always seem so vague and applied differently. I would say that from 1-1 in this game, Milan were clearly the only team really pushing to win it, the team that were playing the more clever football in terms of opening Atalanta up, which is no small thing, by the way, because Gasperini is a very smart tactical coach. It felt like they were doing this really smart job of using their movement to vacate parts of the pitch and then create spaces they were getting the ball into. But at the same time, it felt like this game started at a breakneck pace, and the goal from Leao was brilliant. I love him when he's like that, and you see that smile on his face. It's always one of the things with Leao, when you see him smile and then be his man, he's just feeling it, and it's just really hard not to get swept up in it and to enjoy it. Brilliant goal. And it felt at that time like we were going to get a barnstormer, which I was really excited for, because there's stuff that you can add into this game and this narrative, right? It's the Charles de Ketelaere derby after he's been playing so brilliantly for Atalanta all season. It's a game that potentially could even have dragged Milan back into a difficult battle for the Champions League places, because yes, right now the gap is 7 points, but if Atalanta with a game in hand win it, suddenly the gap is not much at all. But it felt like it petered out. Watching it live, and not for want of trying. I do think Milan were trying to be enterprising and find their ways through, but perhaps from Atalanta's perspective, the draw was not just a bad result, and once they had got themselves back on a level footing, they were willing to dig in a bit more. It certainly didn't feel like they had really the tools to break down Milan properly, and their goal did come in such a whether or not you agree with the decision, it felt like just one of those coincidental goals. It didn't feel like this was the part of some grand narrative that was happening in the game. It's just a thing that happened. So I think it was definitely a better performance for Milan than Atalanta, but from a results perspective, it's not terrible for either of them, but it felt more like Atalanta got what they were looking for than Milan did.
So you feel that Atalanta would have taken the point had you offered it to them before the game? Milan might not have necessarily done so on the back of two straight defeats. I don't know if before the game, but
certainly after Leao scores. Yeah, certainly after the goal goes in so early from Leao and the stadium's rocking and you're thinking, oh, hello. I think Atalanta set their sights accordingly after that.
Marco Carnesecchi, still a young goalkeeper, but he's edged out Juan Musso. He saved 2 penalties from Andrea Pinamonti. I mean, it was essentially the same spot kick the week before. It was a retaken penalty. He saved first to his left, then to his right. Are we looking at someone who should be in the Italy squad as one of the 3 goalkeepers for Euro 2024? There's a lot of competition. I mean, Donnarumma is clearly first choice. We've seen Meret in the squad. We've seen Vicario. We've seen Provedel. There's a lot of options there.
Yeah, Donnarumma has effectively been untouchable for a really long time. I'm not always sure that he should have been. Vicario started really brilliantly at Tottenham, and I'm not certain that should be a closed conversation. But for me, it's who's number 3 after those 2, and I think at that point, there's always that question of what do you want your number 3 to be? Do you want your number 3 to be? Often in the past, we've seen you go for the old hand who's a steady influence and who's
Pepe Reina was the great number 3 for Spain, wasn't he? Yeah,
and Morgan De Sanctis for the national team and things like that. You've seen players who get
Marco
called up.
Amelia, I think, wasn't it 2006? Yeah, absolutely.
Or would you rather bring in someone who's younger and have them have that opportunity and experience of being around the situation? Of course, Alex Meret is someone who's gone from being one of the very highly touted up-and-coming things and is now starting, but perhaps hasn't quite been at the level of consistency that people hoped he would get to. I think Carnesecchi can put himself in that conversation and again, depends a bit what Spalletti wants from that third goalkeeper. Because realistically, when was the last time you saw the third goalkeeper at a tournament actually play? It's almost never.
It wouldn't be a good sign, would it? It would mean a sending off for the goalkeeper in the first match and then possibly an injury to the reserve in the second match. That would be the only case. I think you'd see a third choice goalkeeper, absolutely. Yeah. So, just quickly, yes, no answer. Are you Pioli? Well, sorry, it's not a yes, no. It's an in-out answer. Pioli in or Pioli out at the end of the season?
I'm Pioli in. I'm Pioli in. I hope they get to push on with this Europa run, which they've got a reasonably favourable draw, I feel like, for the last 16, and they have something to aim towards, because it does feel like this end to the season is feeling a bit aimless in the league because they're going to get in the top 4. I would keep him. I have a hunch they won't. I think perhaps there's just been so much conversation around this topic for so long that there's going to be a feeling that it's time for everybody to move on. And if Pioli can find that opportunity somewhere else, maybe he'll even think the same.
That does spawn 2 more questions. I mean, you talking about where Pioli could go next. I mean, this is often the way with Italian coaches. It becomes a case where they almost end up coaching pretty much all of the big clubs, because so few of them work abroad. So if you think Pioli's already worked at Inter, he's already worked at Lazio, he's worked at Bologna, Fiorentina, there's only so many places he can go short of return to one of those clubs. The 2 questions that come to mind are, A, I'm being slightly disingenuous here, could Pioli become Milan's Gasperini? Gasperini's 8th season in Bergamo, he's untouchable there. I think we know the answer to that. But if he's... So that's a sort of non-question. I apologise. The actual question is, if Pioli wins the Europa League, which Milan have never won in their history, one of the few trophies they haven't captured, and he was already the man to win the Scudetto, rather surprisingly, 11 years on from their previous win, does he then become unsackable?
I think the club would not sack him if he wins the Europa League. I think that I would definitely say it's a pretty tough road to winning this Europa League, bearing in mind that Bayer Leverkusen are dominating the Bundesliga and they're still in that competition. Liverpool could very well be the Premier League champions. They're in that competition. It's a very strong field still. And that's leaving aside, obviously, even you might run into Roma at some point, or if not them, then I suppose Brighton. I think if he wins that competition, he would not be pushed, but he could win that competition and walk, depending on what
the mic drop.
are available
I'd
to
love
him.
that from Pioli. That would be great to see. Absolutely.
Beat Liverpool in the final and go replace Jurgen Klopp. Who knows?
Yeah, and then get another
I don't think that's going to happen.
on the other forearm of the Europa League trophy, as opposed to the Scudetto, which he's got on one.
What do you think, Patrick? I mean, do you think he'll still be there next season?
I think he's very unfairly criticised, to be honest. I think this Milan side, like we've often said, he won the Scudetto ahead of schedule with 86 points to Inter's 84. I think they did really well to win that league.
Yes, we'll get to these shout outs. We've got some more new Chronicles Patreon Tifosi this week. Thank you so much, everyone who's already a Chronicles supporter. Makes a huge difference to us. And we have had a few new sign-ups recently. So shout outs to, I'm not entirely sure I'm going to say this right, so I'm sorry, but I think it's Petrit. And also to Kevin Hatchard, Jamie, and Maximilian Campbell. Thank you all so much for your support. Reminder to everyone else, you can sign up for our Chronicles Tifosi Patreons at seriechronicles.com. You can join in the Chronicles Tifosi chat on Patreon. Find us on all the usual socials. All the links are in our show notes. And remember to help us get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers before Patrick does. We will see you all for a Q&A session later this week. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Chronicles is a Chronicles production.